I can't actually say GPT.
You gave it its own nickname. Just call it Chatty.
It should, should do something like that. I actually haven't. It's kind of funny because you're going to be talking to me about this, and I haven't even looked at it. I haven't used it. I haven't even logged into it. I haven't. I know basically what it does and how other people have used it, and I literally have. I looked at the website for it this morning.
That's good.
Just to read about, like, what are we doing here? Yeah. I know nothing else. So how have you used it so far? Like, I know that you used it to write a LinkedIn post, which I then edited because it wasn't any good.
Like, my kids and I have messed around with it a lot. Like, I've asked it a lot of questions about computer stuff, and I really like old CPU architecture, so I've asked it a lot of questions about that. My kids and I have asked it tons of like weird hypothetical questions, like what would happen if you put a gorilla into a black hole,
and what are the responses like?
So for the computer stuff, like, it's all pretty good, but as people have pointed out, it does make mistakes. But
it's supposed to correct those, all right? If you
tell it, then it'll be like, yeah, no, you're right, and then it'll give you the right answer. For the gorilla stuff, so I won't get into the whole conversation because it's a pretty long conversation we had with it, but it starts off very seriously, and it's like, this is not possible for these reasons, and then you can actually encourage it to give you the answers you want. It's like, well, hypothetically, what would happen? And it kind of is reluctant because it's like, that's cruel to animals and it's not feasible. Oh. And then it's like, just out of jest, like pure entertainment, think about like Spider-Man was bitten by a radioactive spider and has spidey powers. So if you put a gorilla into a black hole and he got powers, like, what would that look like? And then it started playing along with it. And it started saying, well, this is probably what the gorilla's powers would be. And it would probably be like a prankster throughout the galaxy doing hijinks on everyone and traveling through time and blah, blah, blah. And then it started elaborating on it.
How can it possibly know stuff like that? That's the craziest conversation to have with it. Who would even come up with that?
Well, somewhere in its data.
It's got information about gorillas in a black hole? Like that? That's
amazing.
So how much data do you think they fed into this thing? Does it say anywhere how much?
It doesn't know. Oh. The model behind it, which is like its brain, is 174 gigabytes, which is pretty big, but that's no data. Yeah. That's just like the wires. Yeah. I asked it how big its data set was, and it said it didn't know. It couldn't tell. It said its data was loaded in from the internet and other forms of media, or whatever articles it was given, and video and audio. It said all of the data that it has to parse is in plain text format, so it's not anything fancy. It's just combing through probably like petabytes worth of text data and coming up with this information.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
I know I saw one thing that was kind of interesting to me is Ryan Reynolds had done a video for Mint Mobile where it basically asked the chat bot, I'm not going to call it ChatGPT, asked it to write a commercial for him.
Okay.
And so it wrote the whole script, and then he was like, it's got to be funnier.
Yeah.
And it would make it funnier. And by the end of it, it was an actual ad that he could have written. And you know Ryan Reynolds, he's kind of a shit. Anyway, so I thought that was interesting. But the other thing that's interesting is you talked about asking it code questions. And when I went onto the website, that's literally what the sample was.
Yeah.
It gave it a snippet of code and said, why isn't this working?
Yeah.
So it's like programmers designed this thing to help them do more complicated programming?
Well, it's by nature, it's a chat bot. So its whole purpose is just to chat, and its model is pretty multi-purpose, right? Like, it just takes the data and tries to make sense of it the best it can and spits out what you're looking for. But yeah, I mean, on the technical side of things, it's pretty strong, but obviously it kind of has that weird, quirky, creative edge to it as well. That can come out more with a little bit of encouragement, as with your Ryan Reynolds version. Mm-hmm. So even with the job posting I did on LinkedIn, I said, okay, make a job posting, and it was very bland and rigid.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to like instruct it or guide it. It just said, too formal, make it shorter and more personal. And it did it, and I still wasn't happy. So it's shorter, funnier, and it did it again. So even with these like very small cues, it kind of knows the path to go along on its own. So I think one of the things that differentiates it from a lot of the tools that we have now is its linguistic processing ability is very natural. Like you can talk to it like a person. It may be a little robotic when it talks back to you, but there's no learning curve to engage with it. You can just talk to it however you want, and it'll figure out your typos and bad grammar and work around it.
So we're inching closer to the amazing Star Trek model of talking to the computer and it answers back with everything that you want to know.
I think so.
That's what we're all working towards, right?
Well, it'll go a lot.
Starship Enterprise.
It'll go a lot further than that. We're scratching the surface still right now. That's the thing, and a lot of people are poking holes at it for its imperfections.
But that's part of the process, right? It's like you got to improve it.
Of course you do, and it blows me away that people are like, oh, like there's a lot of insecurity around. Like a lot of people are defending their jobs, and it's like, oh, see this prototype, it can't replace me, it never will. It's like, that is the stupidest thing that you could say. Like, give it 5 years.
Everybody's replaceable.
Everyone's replaceable, and the best thing you could probably do if you're intimidated by this technology is learn about it, understand it, and see how it can augment your professional abilities.
Yeah.
And use it to your benefit as opposed to letting it replace you.
So one of the things that scares me about it is because, I started my career as a writer, and it's like, okay, well, that used to be something that was somewhat unique, and then because of the ability to write a novel or something like that it's a money-making thing, right? It's unique, and it's storytelling and all the things that we think of as being human rather than the machine. And now we've got this machine that's like, well, I can tell a story too.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little bit intimidating when you first wrote that LinkedIn post on I can't remember what it was, Shop Local.
That's right.
The one that we did. And I read it and I was like, well, shit, like what do I do now? I don't have to write anything. I can just let this generate the content. But then I read it and I was like, well, it's not very good still.
Right.
But I could use some of what it had given me so that I could reformat it into what it is that I wanted to say. So that's still a cost saving or a time savings for me, because I'm starting with a non-blank page, and that inches forward for writers for sure.
Right. And for me, like I don't enjoy writing, right? So to like write out like a 1-page whatever bores me to death, and I'd rather chew off my own arm than do it. But for me, just to give this thing some parameters, and it gives me something that's even 80% of the way there that I can refine myself, I'm totally cool with that.
They were talking about the problems, the situations it was going to cause for academics. Mm-hmm. Because plagiarism, it's not plagiarizing, right? Like it is, but it's not. But there's no way for professors to be able to run a paper through and see if it's been plagiarized off of this ChatGPT. So there are going to have to be some changes to the way that we structure academic papers and do tests and things like that.
I think there'll be a change on how we can let people express that they are masters in their field. Right. Because if they just get this information handed in, you don't know where they got it from. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but I think there's going to be more upfront demonstratable like understanding of the knowledge that you're getting through education.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of people are just slow to change. There's going to be kickback. From my understanding, academia doesn't mind people referencing Wikipedia as much now as they used to, as long as it's a good article, because it has its sources as well. But it took 20 years for us to get to the point where people were even getting remotely comfortable with that.
You're still not supposed to quote or cite Wikipedia directly. You can look at it for other sources, but it's still it's like a tertiary source. Anyways, not leading off into academics, we're trying to keep this closer to programming. I know you were chatting a bit about the potential for this to, I guess what interested me was the potential for upsetting Google's monopoly over search. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons, because one, Google has kind of buried itself with it's turned itself into a poor service for the sake of monetization. It happened very slow and gradual, but if you look at Google from 20 years ago, even if their search technology wasn't perfect, to where it is now, like they are more technically sophisticated, but they are so focused on monetization that it's a bad user experience.
They're not innovative anymore.
They aren't innovative.
Sort of plateaued.
They plateaued, and you got to slog through ads and paid content to look for anything that's actually organic. Where ChatGPT is kind of cutting through all of that for you, just giving you what you want. Now, the other thing that's interesting is Microsoft has always been playing second fiddle in the AI and search realm. And now, out of the blue, like they are building ChatGPT into Bing and into Edge. And this has been like a long, slow plan for Microsoft, like slow simmer, where they've been putting billions of dollars into OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. And they've been very hush about what's been going on. Then they released ChatGPT, and they were still very hush, like they weren't trying to take any kind of credit for it. But once they saw how well it was received and how people were using, they're like, boom, by the way, this is baked into our products, and they've just like unveiled it all of a sudden. Right. And Google, to counteract that, has announced Bard, which is its AI, which first of all, from the demonstrations, was not very good at all. It was making a lot of mistakes in the press release.
They rushed it, right?
And they rushed it. They were trying to play catch up, which is very not like Google.
Yeah.
That's more what Microsoft's been doing for the last couple decades, where they play their cards right, and I think they have an opportunity to take the top spot for internet search and virtual assistants as well, because Siri was kind of the virtual assistant, but it's kind of rigid as well. Like it's not bad if you're saying set me a reminder or how do I get here, but in terms of organic fluid conversation with it, it's light years beyond that. And now Microsoft kind of rules the roost with all of this stuff. So it's interesting from a tech perspective. It's interesting from an industry perspective. And I think in the next 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, it's going to be interesting on a society perspective as well.
Right, how things are going to change. We always get this idea that there's some permanence to these tools that we use, Facebook and Google and all that kind of stuff. But you can see any bit of disruption, something else is going to come up and replace it. And it's almost like we just have to be used to that. The one thing I find interesting is now that they're through the test phase, they're planning on charging a subscription fee for this, right? So one of the problems that Facebook and all the social media and then Google has is that all of their services are basically offered for free outside of Google's workspace and things like that. So that's why you get this flood of advertising, because you as the user are the product and the advertisers is the one paying for you to use these platforms. So do you think there's a better situation coming for users if there is some fee associated with using these products rather than them being free?
I would think so. I mean, I don't see how you can have a good experience with ChatGPT if it's trying to throw in some sort of sponsored influence in there. I think it would be in people's best interest just to say, sure, I'll cough up X number of dollars a month or a year to use the service. And I don't think the companies will have to charge a lot for it. I mean, even if it was $5 per household or $50 a year. If in Microsoft's case, they could throw it into their Office 365 subscription. But we'll see it. I don't know what their revenue model is right now, but I've heard something along the lines of you get a certain number of free requests and then they'll start charging you per request after that. So
heavy users get charged more.
Heavy users get charged, or maybe there would be certain topics, like if we were using it in a household way and asking it silly questions or about whether maybe it's free, but then if I'm saying make me job postings or code snippets, it's like, hey, that's paid access. And I think that'd be okay. Like it's a production tool in that way. So why wouldn't you want to, or why would you feel that you're entitled to have it for free?
Right. So outside of like asking it to write up job posts and stuff like that, have you thought about what the potential business implications could be for improving business productivity or making this part of a process in a business to make a company stronger? I haven't really thought about it. I don't know if you have.
So for the tech side of our business, we'll have to see how accessible ChatGPT is to developers. But I could really see it helping with automatic bug fixes. Like if we just uploaded our whole code base to it and it just looked through everything. It's like, these are bugs that you're going to hit. or automated like front-end testing as well, or writing comments for the code. So there's a lot of very labor-intensive stuff that we have to do in software. Like in software, we spend like this much time writing productive code and this much time maintaining it and debugging it. And I think you can remove a lot of that. That's in the short term. In the long term, this is going to replace a lot of programmers, as it's going to replace a lot of other jobs. And that's where the disruption in society comes. And how that's going to look is anyone's guess. Like if you have all these people that are unable to work now because ChatGPT replace their jobs, like are people gonna, is it gonna kind of stay like hyper capitalistic where people are just gonna be more industries based on entertainment and indulgence because all the actual work is gonna get done? Or is it gonna become a lot more of a socialist society where like
more redistribution of wealth and you can't work, so we need to share around wealth because we have an abundance of it anyways.
Capitalism only works and these big companies only get money if there's people there to spend money, but if there's no people to spend money, then so maybe the big corporate giants will want to maintain control and other industries will pop up and it will still be capitalist, or maybe it will be more of a universal income type thing. It's like, do whatever you want, you have a roof over your head, food on your belly, but one of these things or some sort of combination, something's got to give, because if everything's getting automated, then what are people going to do?
So we're talking about massive disruption to industry and jobs and all this kind of stuff, and I'm sure there's a subset of the population that is running around with their hair on fire. What kind of runway are we looking at before this becomes pretty serious for us to address as even policymakers?
So looking at autonomous vehicles as an example, because especially through the efforts of Tesla and Elon Musk, they made a lot of progress really fast with autonomous vehicles, and it seemed like full autonomy was like a year away, and then it was a year away, a year away, a year away. And so they got to like 90-95% really quick, all things considering, and then there's just all the things that people do well that computers don't. So if your lanes get distorted because of construction or there's heavy snow and heavy rain, autonomous vehicles have had a hell of a time with that. So maybe there's a potential where AI will get to a certain point and will get hung up there. And it's like, okay, people are saved because it can't do some of these other things. Or maybe it'll plow through. Now, to get to that point, I think we'll get there pretty fast. I think that's going to be like within a year. Like if you look at where ChatGPT is now, it's very close to that. So I can really see it the next year or two we'll be at that point. Now, when and if we cross that point, maybe it will be 5 years, maybe it'll be a decade, maybe it'll be like 50 years, maybe it's like, crap, we just can't crack this level of AI. So we'll have to see how that's going to happen.
All right.
Yeah.
Good?
ChatGPT.
How many minutes is that?
You were recording that, right?
Right.
No.
Take 2.
Remember what you said now.
So, I don't know. Oh, I forget my screen.